Salute, my Quickclassics friends. Welcome to this episode of Quickclassics on this Wednesday, December the 15th, 2021. And an early Merry Christmas to you. I thought today that we would take a look at the origins of the Christmas Carol. And if you like the content, please do click a like, subscribe, and share. It does help to grow the channel. And I've got my Christmas lights up. I don't think you can really see the nativity scene behind me, but I've got all the festive decor out and finished up the Christmas episode of Blurry Creatures last night, so that's going to be fun. But I thought today that we would, since at this time of the year so many of us are singing Christmas carols, that it might be a good idea to take a look at the early history, the origins of the Christmas Carol itself. And the Christmas Carol comes from the carol word comes from the Latin word choralia, and it's not untoward to think that probably both in first in Greek and then in Latin, that in the early church communities, probably dating back to at least the time of Hippolytus, the Bishop of Rome, that when, if he's right, and these winter observances were the first nativity observances, then it's not untoward to think that these church communities were actually singing the scriptures um, in almost a kind of psalmistry fashion. But eventually, original carols would be written and composed, and undoubtedly there are earlier ones, but the best evidence we have, that is to say, we know for sure that these were carols written in such and such a time, come from the 4th century in Rome. And amongst the earliest of them that we know, well, probably what I should say before that is one thing you have to remember is that developing in the early Christian world at this time, alongside the, I guess, sort of conventional Christian church communities, were communities of monks. And so the monastic movement, particularly in the Christian East, is taking off. And so carols are sort of sprouting up and growing in this incubator of early Christianity, these two main venues, if you will. But the earliest one that we have a record for is probably the Veni Redemptor Gentium, by none other than St. Ambrose, the Archbishop of Rome, or excuse me, Archbishop of Milan, not Rome. The Veni Redemptor Gentium means come Redeemer of the nations, essentially. And so it's an interesting carol in that, like so many of the Christmas carols that we sing today, they're rejoicing at the arrival of the infant Messiah. And you can see that in the title, the Redeemer of the Nations. But as a kind of footnote to this, there's some lines in the Divini Redemptor Gentium that are kind of jabs at the Arian heresy. Now, for those of you who've heard any of my presentations on Nicaea or Constantine or what have you, you probably heard, or if you're students of church history, you probably heard of this priest Arius, which was the main reason why the Council of Nicea was called in the first place. It was to address this, the so-called Arian heresy, this guy who was questioning the supernatural nature of Jesus at the time. And so there are a few jabs, if you will, at Arius in this carol that's written during the time, but it's the one that we have. It's the best evidence we have for the earliest. Now, as I say, undoubtedly there are earlier carols in both Greek and Latin from the early church period, but this is the hard evidence that we have now. Now. Another roughly contemporary piece was something called the Corde Natus Ex Parentis, or loosely translated, the Father's Heart, begotten or of the Father's heart begotten, and this was done by a 5th century poet from Spain by the name of Prudentius. And so these two examples in particular stand as the earliest hard evidence we have for the existence of carols. Undoubtedly, like many written traditions, musical traditions, nodding to older foundational traditions as well. But clearly, we're looking at the early church world, the Greco-Roman world, out of which this is springing. And after the fall of Rome and Europe enters into the period of the Dark Ages, there's some bright spots in which learning and innovation are kept alive. The um, Irish monastic communities that sprout up are one place, and eventually the whole British Isle tradition of monasticism. And later on, you have uh, monastic traditions and Charlemagne around the 9th and 10th centuries uh, with his palace schools. Um, so there were some of these broad spots, and I think you could say that the monastic communities, in one way, shape, or form, were these bright spots. And wouldn't you know it, it would be another monk in the 9th and 10th century A.D., Bernard of Clairvaux, who would help to popularize and proliferate the carol at Christmas time to northern and western Europe. And so, again, there is that line in the Christmas Carol going through the sort of historical development of monasticism in early Christianity. So, uh, there is a brief history, or at least a look at the early origins of the Christmas Carol. Um, what are some of your favorite Christmas carols? Some of these Christmas carols, even in later periods during the 16th, 17th century, well, were written in Latin. And so you got a lot of, for the longest time, Christmas carols were heard only in the classical languages, particularly Latin. Because it was the functionary language of liturgy in the church. So, but as I say, even later carols in the High Middle Ages, the Renaissance, the Reformation era, and even beyond were written in Latin until you start having carols written in vernacular languages. So very fascinating thing, but I thought in the context of Quickclassics, we'd take a look at the ancient origins of the Christmas carol. So, like I say, what are your favorite Christmas carols? O Come Emmanuel, Adeste Fidelis, um, there's Away in a Manger. There's a host of them. I love Christmas carols. In fact, when I get off the recording this right now, I'm going to go put some Christmas carols on. And I encourage you to do the same. So leave some comments about your favorite Christmas carols, and I hope that this has been an edifying lesson to you. Maybe you learned something you didn't know about Christmas carols. So we'll see you next time. I'm thinking about for the next Quickclassics reading another portion of the Nativity story from Matthew in the original Greek. I read from Luke last year, so maybe I'll do Matthew this year. We'll see how that pans out, as it were. So, Godspeed and Merry Christmas.